The village of Umoma was known far and wide for its peaceful farms, tall palm trees, and a special sweetness in the air. But the biggest mystery of all was why the palm wine from one man's calabash tasted like no other. Obi, the village palm wine tapper, was quiet, strong and rarely smiled. He lived alone on the edge of the forest, not far from the biggest palm trees in Umoma. Villagers whispered about him, saying he had a secret, something that made his palm wine the sweetest, the freshest, and the most sought after. People would walk from distant villages just to taste his palm wine, and no one ever left disappointed. Hello everyone, my name is Adugo, and you're watching the African Tales channel by Adugo. Before we dive into today's video, please kindly click on that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. Now, let's get into the story. The village of Umoma was known far and wide for its peaceful farms, tall palm trees, and a special sweetness in the air. But the biggest mystery of all was why the palm wine from one man's calabash tasted like no other. Obi, the village palm wine tapper, was quiet, strong and rarely smiled. He lived alone on the edge of the forest, not far from the biggest palm trees in Umoma. Villagers whispered about him, saying he had a secret, something that made his palm wine the sweetest, the freshest, and the most sought after. People would walk from distant villages just to taste his palm wine, and no one ever left disappointed. But the mystery of Obi's palm wine weighed heavily on a young boy named Kene. Kene was only 9 years old, with bright, curious eyes and a love for adventure. He often watched Obi from a distance as he climbed the tallest trees and tapped the palm wine with skills that seemed almost magical. But as much as Kene wanted to know the secret, he was also a little afraid. Obi had a quiet, powerful presence, and it was said he could speak with spirits. One evening, Kene's curiosity got the better of him. He decided to follow Obi into the forest. He was careful not to be seen, hiding behind trees and bushes as Obi made his way to a spot deeper in the woods than anyone else dared to go. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the trees. Kene's heart pounded as he watched Obi stop near a huge ancient tree. Obi knelt beside it, whispering words that Kene couldn't understand. Then something strange happened. A soft glow seemed to come from the ground, as if the earth itself was responding to Obi's words. Kene was astonished. He had heard tales of the spirit of the forest, but he had never seen anything like this. He watched in silence as Obi placed his hand on the tree, closed his eyes, and murmured something even softer. When he pulled his hand away, the glow faded and Obi stood up, looking stronger and more focused than ever. He climbed the tree with ease, collected the sap, and then went back down. Kene could barely breathe. What was happening? Why did Obi's palm wine taste so special? Was it true that he had a connection to the spirits? And if so, what did they ask of him in return? The next day, Kene couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. He wanted to tell someone, but he wasn't sure who would believe him. And deep down, he feared that if he shared Obi's secret, something bad might happen. One afternoon, Kene decided to talk to his best friend, Chika, about it. She was the only one he could trust. They sat under a mango tree, and Kene whispered everything he had seen. Chika's eyes widened with every word. But if it's a secret, she whispered, maybe we shouldn't be talking about it. What if the spirits don't like that we know? Kene hadn't thought of that, but the curiosity was too strong. He had to know why Obi's palm wine was so special, even if it meant facing his fears. Days passed, and Kene and Chika made a plan. They would follow Obi again, but this time, they would get closer and try to hear what he was saying to the tree. They waited until the perfect evening, hiding in the shadows as Obi went back to the forest with his tools. This time, they crept closer, holding their breath as they watched him kneel by the ancient tree. They could hear him muttering, though the words sounded strange, almost like a song. And then, just as the glow began to rise from the earth, something happened that made both of them gasp. The ground shook slightly, and they could see a shadowy figure appear beside Obi. It was the shape of a woman, her features gentle but her eyes glowing like fire. Obi spoke to her in a voice so low that they couldn't barely hear. But the woman nodded, her expression softening as she placed her hand on his shoulder. After a few moments, she faded back into the shadows. Kene and Chika could hardly believe their eyes. Obi wasn't just a palm wine tapper. He was a man with a secret connection to the spirit of the forest, a connection that no one else in the village could understand. The next morning, they went to the village elder, who listened carefully as they described what they had seen. The elder's face grew serious and he nodded slowly. "You have seen something that was not meant for children's eyes," he said quietly. Obi has long been the protector of the village, and his bond with the spirit is what keeps our land safe and fruitful. But this bond comes at a cost. "What kind of cost?" Kene asked with his voice barely a whisper. The elder's eyes darkened, one that can change a person forever. Kene and Chika glanced at each other. They had uncovered a secret, but they knew this was only the beginning. The elder's warning echoed in Kene and Chika's minds. They couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen, and now they were more curious and frightened than ever. They tried to go about their daily lives, helping their families and playing by the river, but the memory of that mysterious spirit woman stayed with them. One evening, Kene's father, who also tapped palm wine, brought home his day's harvest. As Kene helped him pour it into a clay pot, he couldn't help but ask, "Papa, why do people say Obi's palm wine tastes different from everyone else?" His father looked at him, a little surprised. "Ah, Kene, you've heard the talk in the village, but that's just because Obi has a special way of doing things. Every tapper has their own touch." Kene tried to accept this answer, but he knew there was more to it. The vision of the spirit woman lingered, and he had the feeling that the elder hadn't told him everything. Later that night, Kene dreamed of the forest. He saw Obi standing beside the ancient tree, whispering to it like before. But this time, the tree spoke back. In his dream, Kene could feel the power and the sadness in its voice. It warned him of a coming storm, of something dark that would put the village in danger. He woke up in a sweat, the dream so vivid that he could still hear the tree's voice ringing in his ears. The next day, Kene told Chika about the dream. She looked worried, and together they decided to speak to Obi directly. It was risky, but they needed answers. That evening, they approached Obi's small hut at the edge of the village. They were nervous, but Kene knocked on the door. After a long moment, Obi opened it, his dark eyes sharp as he looked at them. "What are you doing here, children?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Kene took a deep breath. "Obi, we know your palm wine is different. We've seen things." Obi's expression changed. He looked at them with surprise and a hint of sadness. He stepped back, opening the door wider and motioning them inside. His hut was simple, with just a small table, a mat, and a few tools for tapping wine. The air smelled of herbs and something else, a faint earthy scent. "Sit," he said, and they did. Obi watched them quietly, as if trying to decide how much to say. "What you saw," he began slowly. is something that even the adults in the village do not know. The spirit you saw is the guardian of this land. She has been with us for many generations, protecting us and blessing our harvests. I am her messenger. Kene and Chika's eyes widened as he continued. You see, many years ago, the land was barren. There were no palm trees, no crops, nothing but dry soil. The villagers prayed and cried out for help. And then one night, a woman appeared to the village elders. She promised to make the land fertile again, but there was a price. Kene leaned forward. What kind of price? Obi looked away as if the answer was painful. One tapper from each generation would have to give a part of their spirit to her. She would bless the land and the wine, but the tapper would carry a burden, a part of the spirit's sadness, her loneliness. Chika's eyes filled with concern. So you are carrying that sadness? Obi nodded. Yes, and it is why the wine tastes the way it does. It is infused with the spirit's essence. But lately, she has been restless. I fear something is coming, something that even she cannot protect us from. Kene shivered. Is it the storm? I dreamed about it. Obi looked at him in surprise. You dreamed of it? Then perhaps the spirit has touched you too. She reaches out to those who are sensitive, those who are open to her presence. Kenneth felt both fear and a strange sense of responsibility. What could a child do in the face of such danger? And yet, he knew that the spirit had chosen to show him something important. Obi took a deep breath and stood up. Tomorrow, I must go into the forest to speak with her again. I do not know what she will say, but perhaps she can tell us more about what lies ahead. You two must promise to stay away from the forest tomorrow. It will be dangerous. Kene and Chika nodded solemnly, though in their hearts they weren't sure they could keep such a promise. That night, Kene lay awake thinking about Obi's words. If the spirit had truly chosen him to see her, then didn't he have a duty to help protect the village? He couldn't shake the feeling that Obi was going to need his help, even if he didn't know how. The next day, Kene and Chika waited until dusk. They hid behind a bush near Obi's hut, watching as he prepared his things and set off into the forest. Once he was out of sight, they followed at a safe distance, careful not to make a sound. The forest was darker than usual, the trees casting long shadows over the path. As they walked, Kene felt a chill in the air. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Finally, they reached the ancient tree. Obi was kneeling before it, speaking softly. This time, Kene and Chika moved even closer, their hearts pounding. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a cold wind swept through the trees. The spirit woman appeared again, but her face was filled with fear. Her glowing eyes turned to Obi, and then to the children hiding in the bushes. You must not be here, she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves. The darkness is near. It seeks to consume the land and all who dwell in it. Obi turned and saw Kene and Chika. For a moment, he looked angry, but then he sighed, as if accepting that this was their fate. He reached out his hand, motioning them forward. If you are here, he said, then you must help us. The spirit has chosen you, and we cannot do this alone. Kene and Chika stepped forward, feeling both fear and courage welling up inside them. The spirit woman looked at them, her gaze both kind and sorrowful. The darkness is coming, she said, but together we may yet have a chance to stop it. Kene and Chika stood frozen in the presence of the spirit woman. Her glowing eyes seemed to pierce through them as though she could see deep into their hearts. The air around them grew colder and the trees began to sway, though there was no wind. Obi's voice broke the silence. "What do we need to do?" he asked, his tone urgent. The spirit woman's face twisted with sorrow. "The darkness that is coming is not just a storm. It is something older, something from the deep heart of the earth. It is the forgotten spirits, angry and hungry for revenge." Kene felt a shiver run through him. He had heard stories of the forgotten spirits, those who were banished long ago for causing harm to the land, but he never imagined they would return. "What do we have to do to stop them?" Chika asked, her voice trembling with fear. The spirit woman nodded slowly. "To stop them, you must find the heart of the forest. There lies an ancient stone, the stone of balance. It was once used to keep the dark spirits in check, but it has been hidden for many years, and now it is the only thing that can save this land. Obi alone cannot find it. He needs the help of the children. Your hearts are still pure, untouched by the shadows that lurk in the world of grown-ups." Kene's heart pounded in his chest. A stone that could stop the dark spirits? It sounded like something out of a dream, and yet he knew that the spirit was not lying. The weight of her words pressed down on him. "Where do we find this stone?" Kene asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The spirit woman raised her hand, and a faint glow appeared in the palm of her hand. "The stone lies deep in the forest, where the oldest trees grow. But be warned, the path is not easy. The forest will try to lead you astray. You will face challenges that will test your courage, your friendship, and your spirits. Only by staying true to each other will you find the stone." Obi nodded gravely. "We have no choice. If we do not find the stone of balance, the darkness will consume everything. Our village, our families, even the spirit who protects us." The spirit woman's form began to fade, but before she disappeared completely, she whispered, "Be careful, children. The darkness is not just outside. It is inside too. Trust each other and trust yourselves." With that, she was gone, leaving only the faintest trace of light in the air. Kene and Chika exchanged nervous glances. They had always dreamed of adventure, but they never imagined it would be like this. They were about to embark on a journey that could change everything. Obi stood up, looking at them with both a mixture of respect and concern. "We must go now. Time is running out. Follow me and do not stray from the path. The forest is treacherous and the shadows are already stirring." With that, they set off into the forest. The path ahead was dark, the trees towering above them like silent giants. Kene felt his heart racing. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made him jump. But he held his breath and kept walking, trusting Obi's steady steps. As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew heavier. The trees seemed to press in on them, their twisted branches reaching out like hands. Kene tried not to look at the shadows that seemed to shift around them, but they were impossible to ignore. "This way," Obi said suddenly, pointing to a narrow path between two ancient trees. "We must stay close." They followed him without question, though Kene could feel a strange energy in the air. The forest seemed alive, as though it were watching them. Every now and then, Kene would catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, dark, flickering shapes that made his skin crawl. "Obi, what are those?" Chika asked, her voice trembling. Obi paused for a moment, his face serious. "Those are the lost spirits. the ones who were forgotten long ago. They wandered the forest, lost and angry, because they were cast away before they could find peace. Kene swallowed hard. He had always heard stories of such spirits, but to see them for himself was terrifying. He wanted to run, but he knew they had to keep going. The stone of balance was the only way to stop the darkness from spreading. The path grew steeper, and soon they found themselves climbing over rocks and through thick underbrush. Kene's legs ached and the cold air made it hard to breathe. But Obi moved with ease, leading them forward as though he knew exactly where he was going. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, with roots that seemed to reach deep into the earth. The tree's bark was covered in ancient carvings, and its branches stretched out like arms reaching for the sky. "This is it," Obi said, his voice low. "The stone of balance is beneath this tree. But be warned, reaching it will not be easy. The spirits of the forest will try to stop us." Kene looked around nervously, his heart racing. The clearing felt alive with energy, and the shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the trees, watching them closely. He could feel the tension in the air, and he knew they were not alone. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The roots of the ancient tree began to twist and shift, as though they were alive. A loud cracking sound echoed through the clearing, and from the depths of the earth, a dark figure emerged. It was a shadowy form, tall and powerful, its eyes glowing red like embers. The figure raised its hand, and the air grew cold. Kene felt his breath freeze in his chest. "This is the darkness," Obi whispered, "the guardian of the stone of balance. We must defeat it if we are to reach the stone." Kene and Chika looked at each other, fear in their eyes. But they had no choice. They had to face this dark force if they wanted to save their village. The dark figure stood before them, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Its form was shifting, like smoke swirling around a solid core. Kene's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the towering shadow. The air felt colder with every passing second, and a chill ran down his spine. He could feel the weight of its presence, as though the very essence of fear had come alive. Obi stepped forward, his expression resolute, but Kene could see the tension in his shoulders. "Stay behind me," he warned, but his voice was calm, almost steady. "The spirits may try to overwhelm us, but we must not give in to fear." Kene and Chika nodded, but deep down, they both knew that this was unlike anything they had ever faced. The darkness was not just an enemy they could fight. It was something that fed on their fear, something that could twist their thoughts and make them doubt everything they had come to believe. The figure raised its hand, and the shadows around them seemed to come alive. They coiled around Kene's feet, tugging at his ankles, whispering words that made no sense but filled his mind with dread. He could feel the coldness of the shadow creeping into his very bones, and for a moment, he wondered if he could even move. "Do not listen to it," Obi's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "The darkness will lie to you. It will make you believe that you are weak, that you cannot win, but you must stay true to your heart." Kene clenched his fists. He could hear the shadow's whispers, its dark promises. Everything it said was meant to make him give up. It told him he was too small, too young to fight the darkness, that Obi was using him, and that there was no hope. But Kene remembered the words of the spirit woman. "Trust each other and trust yourselves." He looked at Chika and saw the determination in her eyes. They were in this together and they couldn't let fear tear them apart. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice steady as he spoke. We are not afraid of you." The shadow paused, as if taken aback by Kene's courage. But the dark figure quickly regained its composure and began to laugh. A cold, hollow sound that echoed through the forest. "You think you can stop me?" it hissed. "You are nothing but children. You cannot defeat me. I am the darkness of forgotten souls. I am the fear that lies in every heart, and you cannot escape me." Chika stepped forward, her voice strong. "We are not afraid. We have each other, and we will not let you win." The shadow recoiled, as if struck by her words. It seemed to falter for a moment, and then Obi moved forward, his hand outstretched. He spoke words that Kene couldn't understand, his voice a low chant that seemed to echo off the trees. The shadow screeched in anger, but Obi did not falter. "You will not break us. We are the light that pushes back the darkness. We have the stone of balance and we will protect it." As Obi's words filled the air, the ground beneath them began to tremble once again. But this time, it wasn't the shadow that was shifting. It was the earth itself. The massive roots of the ancient tree began to glow, their lights piercing through the darkness like beams of sunlight breaking through the clouds. The shadow seemed to shrink, its power waning in the face of the stone's ancient magic. Kene could feel the energy around them changing. The darkness was still there, swelling and twisting, but it no longer seemed as powerful. Obi's chant grew louder and the glowing roots reached higher, as though they were trying to touch the sky. The shadow screeched in frustration, its form flickering as if it were being pulled apart. For a moment, it seemed to weaken and Kene could see the fear in its glowing eyes. The darkness wasn't invisible after all. But then, just as they thought they had won, the shadow let out one last furious roar. It lunged towards them, its dark tendrils reaching for Obi, Kene and Chika. The air grew thick with tension and Kene's heart raced. It was all happening so fast. Then, in a flash, Obi raised his hand high. The glow from the tree's roots intensified, flooding the clearing with blinding lights. The shadow recoiled, its form beginning to disintegrate. As the light surged forward, the darkness screamed one last time and vanished into the wind, leaving nothing but an eerie silence behind. Kene stood frozen, his breath coming in quick gasps. The clearing was still, and for a moment he wondered if it had all been a dream. But the glowing roots of the ancient tree were still there, their light slowly fading, leaving a warm, peaceful glow that filled the space. Obi lowered his hand, his face tired but relieved. He turned to Kene and Chika, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You did it," he said quietly. "You both faced the darkness. Together you saved us." Kene's heart swelled with pride, but he knew there was still work to be done. The stone of balance had to be restored to its rightful place, so that the spirit could continue to protect the land. But for now, the darkness had been driven away, and peace had returned for the moment. But as they made their way back to the village, Kene couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. The forest was still filled with secrets, and the spirits were still watching. What would happen next, and what other challenges would they face along the way? As they approached the village, Obi turned to them one last time. "Remember, the balance of this land is fragile. The darkness will always seek to return. But as long as there are those who are willing to fight for what is right, the light will always have a chance to shine." Kene and Chika nodded, their hearts full of determination. They had faced the darkness, but their journey was far from over. There was still much to learn, much to protect, and much to discover about the secrets hidden deep within the forest. And so, With the village behind them and the path ahead uncertain, they prepared for the next chapter of their adventure, knowing that the spirit of the land would always guide them, and that together they were stronger than any darkness that might come their way. As they walked back into the village, the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden glow across the fields. The forest behind them stood still and peaceful, but Kene felt a weight in his heart. They had won the battle, yes, but the war was far from over. The darkness had been driven back, but not destroyed. It could return at any time, as the spirit woman had warned them. He walked ahead, his steps slow, his eyes distant. The village was calm, but Kene could see the worry in his face. The spirits are not easily defeated, Obi said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The balance will always be fragile, as long as there are those who wish to upset it. Kene nodded, understanding now the true weight of Obi's responsibility. The tapa's role wasn't just about harvesting sweet palm wine. It was about protecting the land, the people, and the delicate harmony between the human world and the spirit world. That night, the village gathered around the fire to celebrate their victory. The elders smiled, relieved that darkness had not taken hold, and the villagers sang songs of thanks for the spirit's protection. But there was a solemnity in the air, as if everyone knew that peace could be temporary. Kene and Chika sat together, watching the fire flicker in the cool evening breeze. The villagers celebrated, but Kene couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at work. Something that required them to be ever vigilant. The next morning, Obi called Kene and Chika to his hut. He had something important to tell them. The stone of balance must be returned to its resting place, he said. We cannot leave it where we found it. The spirit of the forest will only stay at peace if the stone remains hidden, protected by the oldest trees. Kene and Chika nodded in agreement, and together with Obi, they made their way back to the forest. This time, the journey was quieter, less hurried, and more thoughtful. As they reached the clearing with the ancient tree, Obi spoke the words of an old prayer, asking the spirit to bless the stone and to keep it safe. Kene stood beside the tree, his hand resting on its cool bark. He thought about everything they had been through, the fear, the darkness, the battles they had fought, and the lessons they had learned. They were stronger now, not just as a village, but as individuals. As Obi placed the stone of balance back into the earth, the ground seemed to hum with energy. The tree's roots tightened around it, holding it in place as if it had always been there. The air grew warmer, and the light from the stone seemed to cast a peaceful glow across the forest. Kene knew deep down that the balance had been restored for now. They stood in silence for a long time, knowing that the spirits were at rest, their work completed. But Kene couldn't help but wonder what challenges lay ahead. The darkness was not something that could be completely erased. It was a force that lived within every heart, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, Obi spoke. We must all remember this. The strength of the land is tied to our hearts. If we forget the lessons we've learned, if we let fear take root in our hearts, the darkness will return. Kene nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. This battle had been a test, not just of bravery, but of trust, kindness, and unity. Together, they had faced fear and emerged stronger. But they couldn't afford to forget what had happened or how close they had come to losing everything. As they made their way back to the village, Obi turned to them one last time. The greatest power you have is not in defeating the darkness, but in keeping the light alive within yourselves. Never let the shadows of fear take hold of your heart. And always remember that no one is ever too small to make a difference. That evening, Kene and Chika stood by the village, watching the stars twinkle in the clear night sky. They realized that their journey had only just begun. The forest still held many secrets, and the spirit of the land would always be with them. But as long as they stayed true to each other and to the light in their hearts, they knew they could face anything that came their way. And so, with the village safe and the balance restored, Kene and Chika knew one thing for sure. No matter how dark the world might seem, as long as they had each other and their courage, they could always find their way through the shadows. Moral lessons. 1. Courage in the face of fear. Kene and Chika showed that even when faced with a fearsome enemy or a seemingly impossible challenge, having courage and standing together can make all the difference. Fear might try to overwhelm you, but you can overcome it with bravery and determination. 2. The importance of unity. The story teaches that when people work together and trust each other, they become stronger. Kene and Chika didn't face the darkness alone. They had Obi, and together they fought as one, learning that unity is more powerful than any force that tries to break them apart. 3. Balance and responsibility. Just as Obi cared for the land and its spirits, the story highlights the importance of balance. Every action, whether good or bad, has an impact on the world around us. We all have a responsibility to protect the earth and live in harmony with nature. 4. The power of kindness and empathy. Throughout their journey, Kene and Chika learned that kindness, understanding and helping others are powerful ways to confront the challenges of life. When they showed respect and compassion, they were able to draw strength from the spirit and their village. 5. Facing darkness within. The darkness the characters fought wasn't just external. It was a part of themselves. The story teaches that we all have fears, doubts and weaknesses, but we can overcome them by staying true to our values, trusting ourselves, and remembering the good in the world. We have come to the end of the story. If you love this video, please kindly share with your loved ones, leave us a comment on your opinion, and subscribe for another interesting video like this. Until I see you all on the next one. Bye for now.